Well, welcome to the Discipleship for the Decades podcast. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Karis.
And we are happy that you guys have joined us today. And I'll be honest, that's one of the things we really hope to do around here is be honest and forthright. It has been a day, like I've been running around like a chicken with my head cut off. I don't know if that's kind of how you felt or not, but I know we've been sharing a lot of the same.
I feel like my kids are behind a screen all day. I have been on calls from 9 to 2 p.m. was straight on a call, different calls, but all on calls on screen. And that is so draining. So all of you people who do that all day long, let's just all do a stretch together.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I hear you.
So yeah, it's been a little crazy. This is a time of solitude, right, for me to sit down and take a deep breath of. So Sunday, we're on the back end, only one more week left of our series, Make This Place Your Home. And Reverend Dr. Tom Boone actually recorded the sermon last week, and we were able to show it yesterday or Sunday. Yep. And so that was cool. And one of the things that was kind of one of the big points was mutual kind of submission, right? Husband, wife, parent, child. And it led me to think, what are some of the house rules, right? We talked about that several episodes ago. What are those house rules that cultivate that environment or whatever you would say of mutual respect? Yeah. So I don't know if you've...
Camp house rules around that. As I think about that, we as parents, Randy and I, try to practice not talking down to our kids, really, and we've practiced that since they were small. So rather than saying, baby talking them, we never baby talk them. And I feel like that was respect for my kids and who they were going to become. And others may differ and say that's ridiculous. But another piece is letting them be who they are and giving people freedom to be who they are. And I think that there's always a desire as a mom, as a spouse to control, right? To have dominion over something in a not healthy way. And so I think what I'm learning in parenthood, in partnership, in working with colleagues, anyone, this idea of how do I let somebody be who they are to the best of who they are, rather than try to have dominion over them and in a collegial way, and that mutual respect. Yeah. So I think that works for kids, it works for spouses, it works for colleagues. I don't always practice it perfectly, and I do have to ask for forgiveness, which I know we will get into later. But what about you, Jeremy? What have you... Well,
I'll mention some things, Churchill household rules, but it's interesting you talk about not baby talking the kids, because both of their kids are probably two of the most mature students that we work with in the ministry. And part of me is like, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you've always kind of tried to keep them on that same level. I don't know, it just seemed they look like mini adults half the time when I'm having a conversation. So I think that's a good thing. We'll give you props, you and Randy, for being good parents. But
no, there's a lot of bad parent moments as well. So
I think of things like something simple, but Ann and I do, like if you cook, the other person cleans, right? That kind of sharing of some of the household chores, and just trying to understand what it looks like to give people space. And I mentioned this not too long ago. It was hard for me early on when Ann and I would have a disagreement to know that, okay, she's someone that just needs space. But now we've come to the point where it's like, okay, either Ann needs space, or even I have come to love just being by myself. It's not something I used to do as an extrovert. I was like wired to go, but now I'm like, oh, being by yourself isn't so bad, right?
There's fruit that comes from that.
Exactly. Yeah, she, being Ann, has definitely rubbed off on me in that regard. But yeah, so that just knowing and the signs to look for when we can tell when one or the other just needs to be in another room reading a book, reading the Bible, watching an episode of whatever TV show that the other one doesn't like, right? Like, it could be anything.
Well, and I like how you said that Anne has rubbed off on you. I think that's very true. As you, the iron sharpens iron, right? We have that in Scripture, but this idea of, okay, that God brings people into your life to rub off on you and for you to rub off on them and to realize that it's a beautiful thing. And when you start getting rubbed, sometimes and it feels chafing, right?
Yep.
And we all know that feeling. But when you get rubbed in a way that softens your edges or that shapes you more into the image of Christ, and I think that's what relationships do. Kids, parents, colleagues, friends, again, rubbing in a good way. And when you see that person as, man, I'm glad you're in my life, because I would never have known that I needed rest. I would have never known silence. I never would have known, getting out and recharging my batteries, like what those various things are that you learn from being in relationships. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting how when I think, like, when I look back and I go, that's just one of many ways that I've been shaped and changed by having Anne come into my life, right? Or by being a part of a small group and those people are being, right? Or being a part of a staff, whatever it is, right? Looking back, and sometimes that's what it takes. It takes looking back to see what kind of molding and shaping has been done over time. I do think it is interesting because I often think, like, sometimes I rub the wrong way too, right? And I think that's where this piece of forgiveness, and, we're in the series, 70 times 7, that when you do get rubbed the wrong way, right, that can happen. You can, or there's the dominion piece, that was kind of talked about in Tom's sermon today. It's like, yeah, we need to be willing and kind of able to say, look, I messed up, right? I need forgiveness. Go to the person and say, but that's not often easy to do. That's kind of one of the conversations we had in this first week of the study. It's like, that's not a comfortable place for us, right? We're not called to be in the comfortable, but that's not something that we typically care for. I don't know. I assume.
Yeah, well, and I think about when we think of being followers of Christ, and we think of, okay, he's saying to Peter, it's not just 7 times that you're forgiving, it's 70 times 7. And it's not, 490. It is this idea of constant, like, it's a regular. You're going to regularly have to humble yourself, to ask forgiveness, and also to give forgiveness, both. And so this is not a concept that feels normal or culturally welcomed. It feels weak, right? In some ways that, okay, I'm being dominated over and now I have to ask forgiveness, versus can we see forgiveness? And we talked about this in our small group, framing it in a whole different light of strength and blessing, and
joy,
freedom and joy. And I think when you frame forgiveness that way, which is what it is, then it's paradigm shifting. And I think that's where we're hoping to go with 70 times 7 as we dig in deeper.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that Bruce Wilkinson, who's guiding us through this study, one of the things that stuck out to me was this idea that, like, it says that God will deliver us to the torturers, right? There will be torture. Not that he does the torture, right? Let's get that out. It's not God doing it. He's delivering us to someone who's going to. But this idea that the fear of torture is what keeps us, or is what should guide us towards forgiveness. And it's because we want a life of joy, right? We want that life of fulfillment, right, that we don't get otherwise.
Right. Who wants to live in a constant state of, tortured soul, of the tragedy of this wretched life where you feel like you are held captive in bitterness or anger or grief or whatever it is that's holding you? That framing torturer in that way makes it, this isn't me being handed over to the devil. it is really this understanding of torment in a whole different light, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and to understand that one of the things that was pulled out is the Greek word for torment or torture being, what was it? Added stress was one of the pieces. And I'm like, how many times do I look back and go, wow, I was so stressed out in a situation or in a particular moment in time. And I go, I wonder if that was because I haven't, there was something that I needed to forgive, whether that was someone or even myself, right? And I'm like, wow. When you think of torture, torment as stress, right, then it gets a lot more real.
Yeah.
Because if you're like me, stress is something that I often feel like I'm just inundated with at times. Like there are times where it's just like stress is peaking, right, nonstop. And to think that maybe that torture is coming from
unforgiveness.
Yeah. And
yeah.
it's something small. Stress isn't small by any means. That's not what I'm saying. But I feel like in my head, at least I, in the grand scheme of things, feel like, oh, stress is small. My stress over some situation is small compared to so-and-so who just lost a loved one due to COVID, right? Like when you start comparing it, it seems kind of small, but that can snowball so quickly into much greater and deeper problems. And the torture feels like it's kind of out of control.
And we talked about the practice of forgiveness and that keeping that snowball effect from becoming bigger than it should. And I know last week we talked a little bit about the practice of forgiveness, and but I think this study will lead us into what does that look like practically daily, to be able to identify, okay, I am now aware that I feel tortured or I'm feeling stressed. So what is the source of that? Is there some unforgiveness in me that needs to be reconciled? Or is there something that I need to that I need to forgive somebody else, right? So it's either my own stuff or I need to forgive somebody else's stuff. Yeah. And so those two components, and I thought the statistics on it were really interesting. How, wasn't it Wilkerson who said 92% or 90% of psychiatric cases would be resolved if these issues of unforgiveness were resolved, right?
Yep.
And I don't know where he got that stat. I don't know if he said it, but I just thought, oh man, the root of mental health, the root of so much of our relational angst can get pent up in that unforgiveness that festers versus being dealt with, where Christ is saying, I want you to live in freedom. So 70 times 7, yeah, you're going to keep doing this because it's a practice that you need to do daily, because every day, if you feel like me, Jeremy, there will be stuff that comes up where you go, man, I'm holding on to this anger. I'm holding on to this hard discussion I had with somebody, or I'm holding on to getting cut off by this driver and I'm just angry now. And,
Yep.
you know?
Well, and I likened it to, we had this conversation yesterday, but it was like, someone like me, I know I need to be in the gym, right? And I know that if I would go and through cardio or whatever, lose a little bit of weight, like a lot of things that I struggle with, like good sleep and different things, could probably get better, right? There is a joy, kind of that light at the end of the tunnel is joyful. You know, from previous experience of losing weight, I know that is true. But I've let it snowball so far that now trying to get up and moving and motivated and really start that process is much harder than it would have been if I had gained 2 pounds and go, oh, I need to lose 2, right? That isn't as daunting of a task. And I think forgiveness is no different, right? It's when we let 8, 9, 10 different people who we need to forgive start piling up in a list, and then there's 50 things that we need to forgive ourselves. Like, then there's a point to which it's like so overwhelming that in some cases, and I don't know how you guys at home feel, but it's like, I don't even want to, like, I'm just going to keep pushing it off to the side, like even more. And then it just goes. But if you can keep up with that, and we talked a little bit about that last week, right? Like, how do we look back daily on those moments where we go, okay, what areas, where did I fail in a particular day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we can do that, or if we can look back on situations and go, how did I handle this well or not well? I think that's practical, right? That's really trying to be on top of forgiveness each and every day. So yeah, that it doesn't get just
snowballed,
wildly out of control.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about, I'm doing a shameless plug for Fuller, which was the seminary I went to with my mug here. Those of you who are listening, I have a great mug on the coffee table. But one of their key phrases is the next faithful step. And I was thinking about that this morning because the weekend with Super Bowl, my spiritual rhythm, thrown off. Like totally, we had a guest in town, thrown off. And so I get up on this morning, actually, because I didn't do it yesterday morning, this morning. And my spiritual rhythm that I like to do in the morning, I was kicking myself a little bit. And I realized, you know what? Today's a new day. I don't need to go back and read all the passages that I left behind from the days before. Today, I'm going to pick up and I start afresh. And I think, you could hear us talking about 70 times 7 and the work that it's going to require, because it will. But also realize that this is not a one and done thing where you take this course and now you've dealt with all the forgiveness issues in your life ever, because that feels overwhelming. But to say, okay, what's my next faithful step here in forgiveness? And to pray that prayer of, Lord, would you make me aware of what are the key issues that need to come up? And maybe it's one thing in the course that he's going to bring to life for you. And that can be enough. And the practice of forgiveness will be ongoing, but maybe that's one thing that he's just going to reveal. You were enslaved here, and I want to give you freedom. So,
and I think the great thing, and what is talked about in the study is this idea of the season of grace, right? And similar to what you're just talking about, right? Like, there's no expectation on God's part that we forgive immediately, right? There's this understanding, like, he knows it's going to take some time for us to get to a place and to process and to grieve. And
the window of grace. And this, for those of you who have not watched episode 1 of the videos, this is our teaser that Wilkinson says in the mandate to forgive, which is our mandate as Christians, Christ followers, that you will be forgiving people. There is a window of grace, he calls it, the window of grace, which is an exception to forgiveness, but not that you never will. It's that some wounds are so fresh or some trauma is so great that you really cannot even fathom forgiveness until God brings that up for you. Mm-hmm. And he's not going to not bring it up. It's going to come. The timing of that, right, to Jeremy's point, that will change. And there are times where this grace period will be longer. The other exception was childhood. So childhood trauma, childhood issues that you need to forgive, but they happened as you were a child, that when you come to an age where you are old enough to start dealing with your stuff, that God's going to bring those to light.
Yep.
And if we give those issues to him to say, will you take this and will you teach me how to forgive? Will you teach me what needs to be forgiven? What do I need to ask for forgiveness for? That those are the two exceptions, right? This season, window of grace and the childhood season.
Yeah, and the window of grace, and you kind of hit on it, but it's not. That's not an excuse that we get to use to just keep putting it off, right?
Right.
Because that's when the snowball
I'm
happens.
in the window of grace.
Yeah, right.
Right now.
7 years later.
Right.
Where's the SpongeBob meme when you need it, right? But like, no, and it can't be. That can't be how you just like utilize that. But I do think one of the things that we're trying to do. Karis and I are leading a group around this, and one of the kind of take home points, and I think it's a good one to mention here, is to think back on times where maybe you didn't forgive, or maybe there was some trauma, and there was some torment, or there was some stress involved with the situation. Think of how, I'll use the term bad, or just how negative of a situation it felt, and then use those feelings to go, you know what? I don't ever want to get back there, right? I do want to stay on top of forgiveness. I do want to stay in a daily rhythm and practice of doing this, so that it doesn't get to that point, right? Just as Jesus uses the fear of that torment as a way to, in his illustration with Peter, to shift us to a season of forgiveness and the joy that comes with it.
Yeah.
So I would say, look back on some of the areas that seasons, I guess, that you've had some stress and I know that's one of the things I'm doing this week is trying to figure out, okay, what are those feelings that I just don't want to go back to, and use those as motivation not to.
Yeah. And we talked about, I always think of God as the great restorer, the great redeemer. So to go back to a season where you felt torment and to say, Lord, show me and let me feel it again, in the hopes that you can restore and redeem that. I know there's a passage in Joel that talks about the years, the locusts, the waste of the locusts. And there's a season where God will redeem that waste. And I think that speaks to 70 times 7 and the restorative work that I think God has planned for us all who are on this journey of, okay, to take the wasted torment that we do not need to hold on to say, Lord, how can you reframe? How can you turn this torment into blessing in my life? And that God will stop at nothing to restore you. And he'll take you to those hard places, but for the purpose of restoring you to your glorified self, your redeemed self. And, I think the wilderness, I was talking about this idea of the wilderness earlier in staff meeting. The wilderness will take us to those places where we have to cling to God to say, I can't restore myself. I can't redeem myself. I can't even get myself out of forgiveness. Help me.
Yeah.
And
shout out to our Tuesday morning women's Bible study, because today's lesson that they had was all about, it's talking about Psalm 23, but it's all about Jesus restoring us over time as we hit a rocky road or have to climb a mountain or whatever, right? We lean into him heavily. And that's where we just need him. We need to plug in hard, right, to scripture, to into prayer, to, right? Forgiveness isn't something that's just going to magically happen, right? We need to be plugged in and lean heavily on the Father and the Son to help us with it.
And in these podcasts to come, I know Jeremy and I, since we're working through this study ourselves, you're going to hear what we're learning and what we're struggling with and what we feel like we are gleaning from it. So if you are not doing the 70 times 7 study, shameless plug, go for it. It's not too late to start. But also, you can catch a little bit of that here in what we're going to be talking about. And hopefully that's helpful. So with that, we'll look forward to talking more next week.
Absolutely. We'll be finishing off our sermon series this coming week.
Oh, and Jeremy Churchill will be our preacher this coming. So
I am
get
bringing
ready, friends.
God's word to close out Colossians for Make This Place Your Home. And so it should be an interesting sermon from what I've kind of felt God laying down on the paper so far.
Right. Well, we'll see you Sunday too.
Sounds good. Yep. Join us next week for our next episode of the Discipleship for the Decades podcast. Bye, everybody.
Bye.